very much, Chairman, and both governors, thank you for your attendance today and for sticking with us throughout this process. I guess I just have a simple statement and question for you, Governor Walker. I guess for those of us that have been watching this debate play out, and I think this has been covered by several of my colleagues, it's hard to square the concessions that have been made by the unions, their willingness to come to the table, and the continued drive to strip them of collective bargaining rights. And obviously there's been a lot of conversation around the country as to how this plays into a much broader debate that's happening around the nation. And when we look at the amounts of outside money that's been spent in Wisconsin, both with respect to your election, to the fight over the legislation, and then most recently in the last few weeks with respect to this election for the court. It's hard to make the argument that this debate only plays out in the context of Wisconsin's budget fight. And in fact, some of the key players in this drama seem to be pretty open about how this is ultimately about trying to kill a pretty important constituency for working families. Now, I think we had this quote on the board earlier when Mr. Connolly was asking his questions, but let me read it aloud. The state Senate leader, Scott Fitzgerald, said recently during an interview on Fox News, he said, quote, "If we win this battle, and the money is not there under the auspices of the unions, certainly what you're going to find is President Obama is going to have a much more difficult time getting elected and winning the state of Wisconsin." And in a email solicitation or in a fundraising letter, that he sent out, he was making the pitch that should be supported because they faced down big labor's bully tactics and a Democratic walkout in the state Senate to break the power of unions in Wisconsin once and for all. This sounds a lot like a much broader political fight to try to defeat your opponents, to try to defeat the advocates for working families. And I guess I'm sure you have a good answer to this question, but I'd like to know if you agree with the statements of your state Senate leader, Scott Fitzgerald, and how you address the concern of many of ours that the reason that you have $2.1 million being spent on behalf of your candidate for the court, the reason that you have groups like the Koch brothers pouring in thousands and thousands of dollars, because this is about a much broader effort, and it seems that some of the key players in the fight, certainly in the state legislative level, are very open about how this is a much broader assault on unions and the allies of unions. And I guess I specifically want to know if you disagree with that very specific statement made by the Senate leader.
Two things. One, I think any outside observer of politics in our state would probably jump to that conclusion for all the parties involved. They'd look at the $4 million the unions pumped in during the debate and the TV ads that went on. They'd look at the money you referenced and others and say outside of Wisconsin, there's a lot of people who are viewing this in a larger context.
Except this fight wasn't started by labor.
Well,
this fight was started by...
Did you just ask about the money? And I fairly recognize that. I want to put in context that there's a lot of money all the way around coming from all sorts of sources, and I think a lot of whom are looking at multiple reasons for this. I can't answer for Scott Fitzgerald. I can't for others. I can answer for Scott Walker. And I can tell you, for me, it's about, certainly in part about the budget, but it's also ultimately about making government work better. And I think, when I talk about the middle class, it's not just the paying middle class, it's even middle class individuals who work for state and local government. Because for us, we ultimately believe, and we've seen the alternative, which we're protecting middle class jobs by avoiding what many other states are doing with massive layoffs at both the state and the local level, and by ultimately putting in place a system where the government's going to work better, where, particularly for schools. I've got 2 kids in a public school. I care very deeply about it. I'd like to have a system like we do elsewhere in society where we pay for performance, not just reward based on seniority. I'd like to have people based on merit and performance. This measure, these reforms, empower us to keep our best teachers in the schools, to keep our best city and county and state workers in place, and that's part of the package as well.
My time's almost up, but I understand you can't speak for him, but you can certainly opine as to whether you agree with your state Senate leader when he says that this is ultimately about trying to defeat President Obama in Wisconsin. Do you agree with
I can tell you what it is for me. It's not about that. It's ultimately about balancing the budget now and in the future, not just in the temporary, because we've had too many people temporarily trying to push our problems off to the future. This is a long-term answer, and it's about long-term reform in our government so our schools, our local governments, and our states operate better. That's what it is for me.
There are millions of dollars being pumped into the state who disagree with that vision, but I appreciate your answer. Thank you very much.
I thank my colleague. I want to acknowledge my colleague.